dialogue about federal funding opportunities for community parks and green infrastructure, and an opportunity to discuss where and how the philanthropic community can help communities better access these funding sources. This conversation is part of a series of Funders Learning Network events, both virtual and in person, that are curated and facilitated by City Parks Alliance, exclusively for grant makers investing in urban parks, recreation, and public spaces. And today we have more than 35 registrants from the foundation community across North America. We want this to be a conversation for you, an opportunity to share and learn from your peers and from our special guests from the Department of the Interior and Council on Environmental Quality, to explore both what's working and what may be challenging in accessing federal resources. I'd like to extend a special thank you to Shantha Alonso and Eve Barnett at the Department of Interior for assisting in the organization of this event. And of course, a special thank you to our two presenters, Senior Director for Environmental Justice at the Council of Environmental Quality, Jalonne White-Newsome, and Assistant Secretary for Fish and Wildlife and Parks at the Department of Interior, Shannon Estenoz. But before we get the conversation rolling, we wanted to provide a quick overview of the key funding sources that are currently available for urban parks. And we've asked our Advocacy Director, Julie Waterman, to share that information with you. Julie?
Great. Well, hello, everyone. As mentioned, I'm the Advocacy Director at City Parks Alliance. I work on behalf of our National City Park Network to advance legislation that provides federal funding to cities for park projects, and I facilitate programming to inform our network on park funding opportunities. As we all know, city parks play a vital role in the social, economic, and physical well-being of America's cities and their residents. Despite their enormous benefits, public funding for parks, especially in distressed communities where their multiple benefits are most needed, is limited and not keeping up with demand. Historic disinvestment has left many low-income communities and communities of color without access to quality parks and recreational opportunities, and with park assets in need of significant upgrades. As we saw with the COVID-19 pandemic, parks became even more vital to communities. And while pandemic precautions have eased, we continue to see increased usage and participation in our parks, trails, and public spaces. That is why federal investment is so greatly needed. Fortunately, excuse me, is that somebody? No. Fortunately, the last few years have provided an unprecedented amount of funding through packages passed by Congress and signed into law. These packages include the Great American Outdoors Act, the American Rescue Plan, the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, otherwise known as the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law, and the Inflation Reduction Act. Along with these funding packages, the current administration has created a number of initiatives to ensure funding is directed more equitably. To help navigate the federal funding landscape, City Parks Alliance created the Equitable Park Funding Hub with support from the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation and the Speedwell Foundation. The hub highlights 5 different federal funding sectors: conservation, brownfields, climate resilience and stormwater management, community development, and transportation. There's also a local funding tab. The hub summarizes grant and technical assistance opportunities under each, including eligibility, park funding use, match requirement, and other important information to help determine if the grant program is the right fit for a park project. It's not intended to be an exhaustive source of funding opportunities, but a starting point with examples and links to the various agencies that oversee the programs. The hub is open and available through our website at cityparksalliance.org under resources. Along with the Equitable Park Funding Hub, City Parks Alliance hosts periodic webinars that highlight the grant programs and include guest speakers from grant recipients that walk through how they accessed these grant programs for their own park projects. We work closely with the National Park Service on our educational outreach. While we are fortunate to have this new federal funding for parks, recreation, and green infrastructure, we have heard through our network that city park agencies face a number of challenges in their efforts to secure federal dollars. They might need help with master plans or environmental reviews, matching grant requirement, community engagement, or even just need a grant writer. These are some of the points of entry where the philanthropic sector might help out. I will now hand it back over to Catherine. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Julie. And now I'd like to introduce our moderator for today's discussion, Shawn McCaney, who's the Executive Director of the William Penn Foundation in Philadelphia. And it was under Shawn's leadership and support from the William Penn Foundation in 2018 that City Parks Alliance launched our Funders Learning Network, which continues to engage grant makers around challenges and opportunities for creating equitable, vibrant, and resilient urban park systems. Shawn?
Thanks, Catherine. I'm thrilled to be here to join this conversation, and I'm thrilled to be joined by my colleagues from the William Penn Foundation, Cara Ferrantino, Jasmine DaCosta, Nathan Boone, and Stuart Clark. Before we jump into our presentation from our guest speakers and open up for a conversation, of a few tech reminders to share to make sure everyone knows how to participate in today's discussion. When you're not speaking, please mute yourself in order to minimize background noise. The microphone icon is on the bottom of the screen. Click it to mute on and unmute yourself. We encourage you to turn your webcam on during the discussion, as it will be a much richer conversation if we can see each other. The camera icon is located next to the microphone, and you can click to turn your camera on and off. Please join the conversation by raising your hand. You can raise your hand in Zoom by clicking on the reaction icon on the bottom right hand of your screen and then clicking on raise hand. Please introduce yourself, the name of your organization and city, and don't forget to unmute your audio before you talk. Typing your question into the chat box is another way to participate. We will monitor the chat box and incorporate those comments into the discussion. If you're having any technical difficulties at any point, send us a message through the chat function and we will help you to resolve it. By the way, my colleagues at William Penn think it's hysterical that Shawn McCaney is giving technology guidance to anyone. But so let's jump in. As Julie pointed out, there is an unprecedented amount of federal funding available for park projects. Our discussion today will focus on how the philanthropic community can help communities better access these funds, particularly for projects in underserved communities. We're specifically looking for examples that foundations can replicate. As Julie just mentioned, for example, the William Penn Foundation, we funded planning and design for federal projects. We funded grant writers for Philadelphia to apply for grant programs, and we've even pledged our own capital as local matching dollars for projects. So there's many important roles that private philanthropy can play in this work. So our first speaker, Jalonne White-Newsome, joins us from the Council on Environmental Quality. Dr. White-Newsome was appointed in May 2022 as Senior Director for Environmental Justice, where she helps lead the Council on Environmental Quality's environmental justice policy work, including the implementation of the Justice 40 initiative. Dr. White-Newsome will provide an overview of this initiative and its goal that 40% of overall benefits of certain federal investments flow to disadvantaged communities that are marginalized, underserved, or overburdened by pollution. Following Dr. White-Newsome is Shannon Estenoz, Assistant Secretary for Fish and Wildlife and Parks at the Department of Interior. In her role, Secretary Estenoz helps lead the department's efforts to strengthen local economies, tackle the climate crisis, ensure equitable access to the outdoors, and protect and conserve public lands and wildlife. Secretary Estenoz will provide an overview of the Outdoor Recreation Legacy Partnership Program, an urban park projects, an urban grant program under the Land and Water Conservation Fund that provides grants to cities for park projects in underserved communities. She'll also highlight additional funding opportunities and talk about our recent travels to local communities where she's heard about their needs. So welcome to Dr. White-Newsome and Secretary Estenoz. Dr. White-Newsome, I'll turn it over to you.
All right, can everybody hear me okay? Awesome. I got to check that because often I'm on mute. So thank you so much, Shawn and Catherine and Julie and all the folks from City Parks Alliance. Thanks to our partners at the Department of Interior and everyone that has taken the time to join this meeting, and also my CEQ colleagues. Again, my name is Dr. Jalonne White-Newsome. Folks call me Dr. J, and I have the privilege of serving as the Senior Director for Environmental Justice at the White House Council on Environmental Quality, better known as CEQ. And our role at CEQ is to coordinate the federal government's efforts to improve, preserve, and protect our nation's public health and environment. And under President Biden's leadership, we've centered environmental justice in all of this work, which is a key component about what you're talking about today. So I'm a native Detroiter, and I believe that we have the largest city island park called Belle Isle right downtown. And growing up, this was so important to me because it was accessible. It was in the city. We had family reunions there. We would go hang out. And again, sometimes folks would use this as a respite on a hot day, particularly folks that couldn't afford air conditioning and didn't have air conditioning in their home. So when you talk about the accessibility of parks and the ability to enjoy parks and recreation and green spaces, it is so important. And we know for a fact that there is limited access to green and blue spaces like bike paths and trails and safe routes to schools and other outdoor areas that can have a big impact on our health and well-being. And when you think about the lower rates of physical activity that result from that inaccessibility and the higher rates of stress and mental fatigue, it is an environmental justice issue. So we also know that more than 100 million Americans unfortunately live in nature-deprived communities, a number that we are trying to substantially reduce through our efforts. And again, I know firsthand how important parks are, particularly in our communities that are facing the realities of environmental injustice. That includes dirty air, high traffic spaces, and multiple pollution sources in very dense areas. So parks and green space can help us sustain the mental health and well-being of our communities, as well as build structural resilience in the communities. Again, whether it's a really hot day, whether it's localized flooding, again, all these things are very common to communities of color and low-income communities, particularly in urban areas. And so when we think about it, it's not only important that you can access the parks, but it's also critical that we have to ensure that communities can benefit from the funding that President Biden has made available to build these communities and spaces that advance our environmental justice goals and make sure, more importantly, that folks have clean air and clean water in a sustainable and healthy place to live. So having been a former grant seeker and a former funder in another life, that access is so important. And so, in fact, I've been in Los Angeles where I am now for the last couple of days at an environmental justice conference. And many communities are raising up so many barriers that you've spoke about already. But again, not knowing the process, not having grant writers in-house, not having a quick way to identify those opportunities that most meet their needs. And the list goes on and on. So thank you, City Parks Alliance, for creating the Equitable Park Funding Hub to help folks navigate what could be a pretty complicated process and to help get all this valuable information out to communities. And thank you for the funders that are also on this call helping the administration meet our goals. So President Biden and Vice President Harris are laser focused on making sure that everyone in this country has access to clean air, clean water, and healthy communities, which includes nature and green spaces. And so 2 years ago, our administration launched the America the Beautiful initiative, where one of the initiative's focus areas is improving access to outdoors for communities with limited access to nature. Our goal is to cut in half the number of people that do not have access to parks and nature by 2030. Last year, we established an MOU, Memorandum of Understanding, across 10 federal agencies to prioritize communities that have been locked out of those benefits that nature provides to, again, ensure that all folks have access to parks and natural areas and waterways. And so the federal government across these 10 agencies, through funding from the president's bipartisan infrastructure law, the Inflation Reduction Act, is investing substantial funding to create more parks. So hot off the press, I'm excited, and maybe you already know that Agricultural Secretary Tom Vilsack announced today that the U.S. Department of Agriculture's Forest Service is awarding more than $1 billion in competitive grants to plant and maintain trees, to combat extreme heat and climate change, and to improve access to natures and cities. Again, this is across all 50 states, and it's made possible by the Inflation Reduction Act. And again, this announcement is a part of President Biden's Investing in America agenda, which works to advance environmental justice, generate economic opportunity, and build a clean energy economy nationwide. And you can check out more at cleanenergy.gov. But also critical to our conversation is the urban and community forestry program that is part of President Biden's Justice 40 initiative. And so during his first week in office, President Biden signed Executive Order 14008, tackling the climate crisis at home and abroad. And this launched the most comprehensive EJ agenda ever taken by the federal government. And it also established several brand new initiatives, including the Justice 40 initiative. So in a nutshell, the Justice 40 initiative is one of the core ways that this administration is striving to implement equity and justice at scale. And if you haven't heard about it, it's an effort to direct 40% of the overall benefits of certain federal climate, clean energy, affordable and sustainable housing, clean transit, and other investments to disadvantaged communities that have been marginalized and overburdened by pollution and underinvestment, which is critical. But I want to also emphasize that Justice 40 is not just a one-time investment or a single pot of money. It is more than just pushing out dollars and cents. It is actually about achieving that deep cultural shift that we need for sustainable change. So it can endure the political winds and deliver these resources to disadvantaged communities beyond us sitting in this room at this time. So in order to achieve that shift, we have to know what the realities are on the ground, what communities are facing every single day. And part of getting that clear picture is making sure that we have the right tools and the data to give us that assessment. And so one of those tools that we use and that all of our federal agencies have to use is what we call our Climate and Economic Justice Screening Tool, or the CEJS for short. Basically, it's an interactive map that pulls in climate, environmental, and social economic burden data to identify these disadvantaged communities, which we call DACs, that again have been marginalized by underinvestment and been ignored. And this is how we're going to identify those communities that are going to benefit from the Justice 40 initiative. So I encourage you, if you haven't seen our CEJS tool, check it out. Find your neighborhood, look at the surrounding communities, and explore how the Justice 40 initiative can embark on real change. So again, that's a cornerstone of our administration's environmental justice agenda, along with the Inflation Reduction Act, which the IRA is the most significant piece of clean energy and climate legislation in U.S. history that includes about $369 billion to tackle climate change through energy efficiency, reducing pollution, and all those great things. So again, the one example that I want to raise in terms of IRA, and there's many, is that the EPA's new Environmental and Climate Justice Community Change Grants Program that was just announced recently, again, investing about $2 billion of IRA funds, Inflation Reduction Act funds, in environmental and climate justice activities to benefit disadvantaged communities through multiple projects. So again, that's just another example. And I'll leave you with, again, another announcement on yesterday that the White House released an updated technical assistance guide that focuses on state and federal technical assistance programs, again, aimed at accessing and deploying all this money we have out there. So in a nutshell, this administration is very committed to not only improving the access of parks and green spaces, but also access to these funds. And so the potential of all this legislation, coupled with our Justice 40 initiative and the great work of our agencies, is monumental. And it can have a significant impact on the communities that I care about and in the communities that I come from. So again, thank you for all your work, and I'm looking forward to the conversation.
Thank you, Dr. White-Newsome. We're going to hold time for questions afterwards, right after Secretary Estenoz's comments. Secretary Estenoz, we'll shift over to you.
Thank you very much, Shawn. Can everyone hear me? Okay. All right, great. Thank you. Thank you, Catherine. Thank you, Julie. Thank you, Dr. J, Dr. J. Wonderful remarks. Thanks for getting us started. As the Assistant Secretary of the Interior for Fish and Wildlife and Parks, I oversee both the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service and the National Park Service. Both of these bureaus administer programs that provide benefits to underserved communities in the areas of recreation, outdoor access, climate resilience. The unprecedented levels of public funding that Dr. J just ran through that have been provided in recent years under the leadership of President Biden those include the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law, the Inflation Reduction Act, And then prior to that, the Great American Outdoors Act, Land and Water Conservation Fund. All of those together will absolutely result in transformational change across the country. Even more so if we can use these public investments to leverage increased private and philanthropic investments. The permanent full funding of LWCF alone would have been transformational. Add those other generational funding packages from the past 2.5 years, and we find ourselves collectively squarely in a moment that I hope we can both appreciate and find ways to seize to make maximum use of. I want to mention a few programs across my bureau. I'm going to focus, as Shawn mentioned, on the Outdoor Recreation Legacy Partnership, but I don't want to go back on mute until I also mention the really good work that's being done by the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service and the funding opportunities through their programs as well. So let me start with the most obvious program, which is actually a National Park Service program. It is the Outdoor Recreation Legacy Partnership Program. Very unfortunately named program, in my opinion. Way too long, not the least bit descriptive. We call it ORLAP, which actually might be worse, but if you'll just bear with that and frankly just commit it to memory, because it is an incredibly important program. It has existed since 2014 as a carve out of the Land and Water Conservation Fund. It's a grant program specifically aimed at supporting parks and other recreational investment in underserved communities. The program has typically operated at about the $40 million level. Before President Biden took office, it was actually being threatened with being zeroed out. One of the very first actions we took when President Biden took office in the very first weeks of our administration was to revive that program, rescue it, and then begin to ratchet it up. And we have gone from that $40 million traditional level to a notice of funding opportunity a year ago of $192 million. And so this administration is investing heavily in this program. Dr. J, I just want to point out that I had the great privilege, the secretary allowed me to announce that $192 million, and we chose to do it at Belle Isle in Detroit, which is a beautiful, beautiful park, and a park that has benefited greatly from the outdoor restoration, from the ORLAP program. So I just want to give a quick shout out to Detroit and to Belle Isle. So we have just in the lifetime of ORLAP, we have invested in playgrounds, ball fields, rec centers, public swimming pools, cutting edge, fully accessible playgrounds. And I have traveled across the country in the last 2 years, visiting many of these sites, both completed projects and then projects that we're just now funding. And I can tell you that the grant program process itself, it's competitive. It rewards community-led and supported park visions for parks and facilities. It rewards leveraged dollars. It rewards certain climate resilient efforts, including, for example, heat island mitigation. I've been on the landscape. I have visited many sites across this country, and every time I do, I am so inspired and gratified at the level of community optimism, empowerment that these specific projects both generate and support. And the people on this call know better than anyone that investing in community has, benefits that far outweigh any individual projects. And I have seen that with my own eyes, the amount of social capital that is built when a community like the ones I've met in Greensboro, Seattle, San Francisco, I've been to Detroit, Minneapolis, I've been all over the country. When people come together specifically to imagine and then build places where their children and their families will play and grow, I mean, the social capital that's built there is really inspiring. I was most recently, I guess, in St. Louis, where there are more than 100 city parks in St. Louis. I think it's 101, but they are not at all equitably resourced. And the neighborhoods who most need safe, clean, intentionally designed parks are both the least resourced, but also have, in some ways, the least capacity to tap into these unprecedented levels of funding that are now available. So ORLAP is a remarkable program. I'm here to tell you our participation level is too low. It is still too low. We are working really hard, and City Parks Alliance is helping us, and other partners are helping us to get that participation level up. There are a number of reasons that we aren't able to push all of the money available out the door, and those reasons are probably the richest source of opportunity for philanthropy to play a transformational role. You know, of course, there are opportunities at the project level. The project I visited, the Midway Neighborhood Peace Park in St. Paul that I visited last year with the secretary, was a partnership, for example, among many others. The Trust for Public Land came in and actually helped fund the project itself. But there are a number of other ways to participate, and we are very focused, for example, in capacity building for these communities to really be able to tap in. I think that's the point Dr. J was making, that these dollars are not useful unless you know, communities can actually tap into them. So I look forward to, you know, maybe for the rest of the call we can talk about more examples, and we can talk about some of the challenges that we're facing, and where philanthropy can plug in and help us be make sure that we're maximizing the amount of impact these dollars can make. I just want to quickly also acknowledge, though, that the National Park Service and ORLAP, not the only program we have. I want to spend just a moment mentioning some of the incredible programs that the Fish and Wildlife Service has in this space also. We have the Urban Wildlife Conservation Program, which include urban wildlife refuges, urban bird tree city programs. Fish and Wildlife Service in some ways is even more adept at partnering than the National Park Service. It just has some flexibilities, operational and policy flexibilities, that even the Park Service doesn't have. We have community organizations in 32 cities across the country just under our urban bird treaty program. We have a number of examples of partnership, sort of project level partnership based programs, from tree planting to programming to all manner of opportunities to be really sort of place-based kind of program and project focused. You know, one thing to keep in mind, we have 101 urban refuges within 25 miles of 250,000 people or more. And so when it comes to open natural landscapes that are easily more accessible to underserved communities, the refuge system is in some ways even better situated than the National Park Service system is. You know, and we have a whole host of examples, including with William Penn Foundation, for example, of partnerships in, for example, the John Hines National Wildlife Refuge in Philadelphia, of just multiple ways for the philanthropic community to come and be value added in the work that we're doing. Finally, I'll say another really important space in the environmental justice space that Fish and Wildlife Service is trying very hard to prioritize is both in public engagement and in transportation. So one of the big barriers to communities getting out to these incredible public lands is the lack of viable transportation alternatives for these communities. And so Fish and Wildlife Service has explored opportunities that range from working with state DOTs to literally improve road and trail access, but then also looking to partnerships to create multimodal transportation options for specific neighborhoods and communities to find ways, you know, to be in these public lands. So I'll end here by just saying how grateful I am, first of all, again, for being invited to join you today. I really want to thank, in preparing for today, you know, I was able to visit the Equitable Park Funding Hub, and so City Parks Alliance, Robert Wood Johnson Foundation, Speedwell Foundation. Thank you for that. That's exactly the kind of creative capacity building work that we really need. We need help. Our processes, we know that not only are they complicated and difficult, but they're downright Byzantine. If you don't have an expert helping you navigate the federal funding landscape, it can really be insurmountable. And so this is an area that I'm really hoping that philanthropy can take a close look at and see whether or not capacity building is something that fits in something that counts as a shared objective. So I'll stop there, Shawn, and turn it over to you. Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much, Secretary Estenoz. So I'd be remiss if I didn't say a quick thanks to Dr. J, because we received news as this program was beginning that Philadelphia received $12 million from the U.S. Forest Service through the announcement today in support of the Philly Tree Plan, which we are a sponsor and supporter of. So thank you for that, Dr. J. And I just want to echo something that Secretary Estenoz says, which is, investments like Orla are absolutely energizing for communities. As a local funder, when we support parks, playgrounds, investments in communities, they really do have an impact and send important messages to communities that we care and that they are important. So thank you for that, for those continued investments and for expanding funding through that program. So we're going to switch over to and invite some direct questions for Dr. White-Newsome and Secretary Estenoz. So please raise your hand or go in the chat, and remember to say your name, your organization, and the city you represent. Any questions for our speakers today? Very talkative bunch. I give a chance for it. And I'm scanning my screen to make sure I'm catching any possible questions. So as folks think about or formulate the questions they may want to ask, maybe I'll ask our speakers to both comment a little bit more on the way they've seen, their agencies have seen philanthropy leverage federal dollars, or what innovative approaches they've seen local communities use in partnership with philanthropy to draw down federal funding or to make federal funding applications possible. I'll just throw it out to Dr. J and Secretary Estenoz if you have any additional thoughts or reflections.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, I think we've witnessed both sort of second order and third order examples. And so where, we've seen direct philanthropy, I mentioned one, the William Penn Foundation, sort of directly matching dollars. But we've also probably more commonly seen philanthropy influencing other partners. So for example, on Masonville Cove, we're partnering with National Aquarium, for example, who are bringing donors to the table to help them raise the matching dollars for, to participate in that programming. And I think both absolutely work, and can be explored and can be very viable paths. I think so finding those third order partnerships that can catalyze, leverage and catalyze existing relationships, I think is a space that can potentially be very fruitful. And then in the capacity building space, this is a little bit different, but I'll toss it out as an example just because it's illustrative of how creative everybody's starting to get with this. And that is that we met with an industry group yesterday, the Outdoor Recreation Roundtable, which is actually an industry organization. And they are investing in capacity building in the DEIA and accessibility space because they've got a business case for the sort of next generation of folks who are recreating, and how we need to have welcoming and ample places where all people can feel welcome and feel drawn to. And so they are trying to create, for example, a similar hub where folks can go for technical assistance to figure out how to tap into federal dollars to do some of this work. Everything from DEIA training to actual infrastructure investment. So I'm super excited that people outside the federal government are recognizing the moment that we're in and really saying, how can we play in this game? How can we be value added in this space? And I'm just seeing a lot of creativity come to the table.
Yeah.
Dr. Jay, you want to add additional insights to that question?
I'll add my 2 cents to an already wonderful response. So I think what gets me excited is that, so at CEQ, we are not an agency. We don't have any money. we have a little bit of power. So I'm taking this from the perspective of what I'm seeing folks doing creatively and how foundations and philanthropy can be so instrumental. So when I think about, kind of the communities that we're focused on, again, those communities that have been facing multiple injustices, not just from air, water, and waste, but just having access to resources, the network of philanthropy, like those are the barriers that we're fighting to remove. But I think where philanthropy has shown up in a wonderful way is really building the capacity of organizations to solve their own problems. So I think part of this, and what I hope will happen is because of Justice 40 and all these, gazillions of dollars, is that we are actually shoring up that beautiful infrastructure that is already there of community-based organizations that know solutions to the problems, that just haven't had the resources to actually activate those solutions. So specifically, I'm thinking about a couple of weeks ago, I had the opportunity to go to New Orleans, and a couple of organizations, the Bullard Center from Texas Southern University, and then Deep South Center for Environmental Justice, pulled together this Justice 40 righteous convening. And the point of this convening was to bring about 200 and so community organizations from across the country that are at different levels of understanding how to navigate the federal government. So 1, I have no idea what I'm doing. 2nd, I'm a little bit more savvy. 3, I've gotten money before. And so you have these different community organizations on different tracks, and they have set up this convening using philanthropic funds to meet people where they are. So 1, you're doing a couple of things. You're connecting folks with agency partners that are at this convening. You're showing them how to move in the places, again, where they are. But most importantly, they're building partnership and relationship, because I feel like that learning and that power that philanthropy, as well as CEQ, has to convene good folks in the same place can be so impactful. And so when we talk about environmental justice and advancing it, it's not just about the right now. It's about how do we sustain that change we want to see. So I feel like wherever philanthropy can help bring folks together in a productive space so they can build those relationships with each other, learn from each other, as well as connect with our agency partners that are the ones responsible giving the money out, that is super powerful. And so we've seen in that Justice 40 convening, there's another organization that has a Justice Forward tour that is doing a similar thing. And also here in LA, I just learned about a foundation for community colleges that is providing technical assistance and support for, I think, states and localities, because again, they have a stake in the game as well. So I feel like, to the point there, we can't, I just want us to continue to think about building the capacity of these organizations in a way where they are not the same after this funding goes down. And I feel that should be a part of the goal as well.
Thank you, Dr. J. Alexa, you have a question?
Yes, thank you. And thanks to both speakers and City Parks Alliance for putting together this event. My name is Alexa Bush. I am with the Kresge Foundation on our Detroit program. I was really curious, Shannon, about your comment about the Outdoor Recreation Legacy program being somewhat undersubscribed. And just curious about, I think at least in a Detroit context, it looks like the lead applicant needs to be the kind of state agency responsible. And just if you guys had any thoughts or advice for maybe states where like those state agencies aren't well connected to the urban communities where some of that work might be really needed, or if there are ways to kind of nudge or be helpful in sort of prioritizing applications from communities through multiple layers of government, or where you might have seen a success of that working well somewhere.
Alexa, thank you for and I could have set that question up. I could have emailed you and said, hey, could you ask me this question? Oh boy, you tapped something. You tapped a kind of a bee in my bonnet, because there is ultimately what we're doing is leaving money on the table, right? Money is getting left on the table. And by the way, you never, ever, ever want to leave federal money on the table because it can always be swept, reprogrammed. And the best way to protect a program is for it to be a popular program and for there to be way more demand than there are resources for it. So we're hyper conscious of that. In fairness to everyone involved, this ramp up is young. Okay, it's only been since President Biden has been in office, and so everybody's kind of getting used to all the money that's on the table now. So I want to give us all some grace on that. However, it is true that because it is not a congressional carve-out, that means that local governments cannot apply by themselves. They cannot apply directly. They have to apply through states. Now, for states that have a healthy LWCF kind of structure and that are committed to helping their urban areas tap into this money, because nobody's competing with it for it. In other words, if you're the state of Michigan and you've got big natural projects out there, 1,000 acres of prime habitat, that project is not competing with the project in downtown Detroit, right? Because it's a carve out. So where you have these really healthy relationships, that is where the biggest success is coming, because those states have grant writing capacity generally, right? They have parks departments and grant departments that can help these communities through that. Where it is not working is either states that are not participating at all in ORLAP, like my home state of Florida, just not participating, or cities like St. Louis, where I haven't dug in to diagnose what's going on there, but there's not the capacity being provided to some of the hardest hit and communities that are in the greatest need. So, I haven't gone through and figured out where those biggest needs are, but to the extent that the organizations on this call have relationships, and I know because I was both an executive and on the board of a grant making institution. I know how deep a lot of these relationships go, to the extent that influencer relationships exist between the organizations on this call and states in particular. There is a lot that we could use the help in encouraging states not to leave this money on the table, and to provide where they can the resources to their communities to compete. Let me say one last thing, and then I'll get off the soapbox. Thanks for putting me up here. But what I have seen myself is that to be successful in this program, we're not talking about, an army of 20 grant writers. I have witnessed, even in a city as big as Detroit, at our big media event, there were the 2 grant writers, who had successfully scored ORLAP after ORLAP after ORLAP after ORLAP. Once a community figures it out and has that capacity in place, they understand the formula for success. That success just seems to continue to repeat itself. What we need to do is spread that capacity around so that more communities have it. Does that make sense? Thanks, Alexa.
Hey, Alexa, thanks for that question. We'll go to Lily, and then Rebecca, I'll catch your comment off the chat after Lily has a chance to ask her question. Lily?
Great. Good afternoon. Lily Weinberg from the Knight Foundation. Thanks again for the conversation, and good to see so many friends. I work on our cities team at Knight, and we invest in 26 cities across the country, and we have played a role in various ways for what we believe is, helping to support the federal dollars at a hyper local level. So whether that's putting down dollars, like you said, Shawn, for local matches, or Dr. J, you talked a lot about the capacity building of hyper local organizations that are driving this work. So we certainly have done that. I just want to make a comment, Dr. J, on what you were saying around that capacity building, and as we've also been deeply building that capacity of the organizations, but also really trying to link to broader equity goals within the community too. And so just wanted to highlight that, and then ask you if you have any examples of that or tips for doing that, because that's really bringing in a broad multi-stakeholders to do that in cities. And then I did, Alexa, your question really was also my question on the state piece. Secretary Estenoz, I'm also from Florida, and I was deeply saddened. I serve on the board of the Underline last year when I saw that Florida didn't participate. And so thank you for that explanation. But I would like to just understand the why. Why are states not participating? So those are my two questions. Thanks.
Dr. J, do you want to take the first one?
Yeah, I'll try. So thank you so much, Lily, for your questions. And I don't know if this is going to answer directly, but I'm going to make a comment. So I see, again, environmental justice and equity is being distinct, but very much connected. Because to me, you can't really achieve environmental justice without having equity and all the stuff that we're talking about. And so what I think is beautiful about this administration is that we are trying to tackle both, right? So our new executive order on environmental justice very much connects to the executive order that the president just updated on equity. And so when we talk about the accountability across the agencies and how they're working towards EJ and working towards equity, there are things and systems that we're putting in place to make sure that our agencies are both achieving their equity goals, which is looking at, again, folks that are not able to connect to the benefits and resources of agencies, as well as the environmental justice goals. And so I think most of the conversations that I'm in with stakeholders and with folks that are working to advance environmental justice, you cannot not have a conversation where equity is a part of that. So many of these conversations and convenings also include those folks that are, again, trying to work very hard because, again, equity is about making sure that everybody has access to health, education, and all these different pieces, because again, environmental justice is a little bit of everything. And so it's not just the air and water. So I truly believe there are many examples, and happy to talk more offline about, kind of our environmental justice goals and our equity goals, not only in the administration, but that is just, I think, in my humble opinion, the way we can't silo them. That we have to talk about both. So anyway, that's super important question. And thanks for that. And I'll turn it to the secretary.
Thank you so much. Let me just make one quick add to that, and then I will talk about the states. And that is that one component of this, Lily, I think that ORLAP has the potential to be value added is its emphasis on community-led design and community-led visioning. And so, I was at I think it's called the Brandon Road Mall project in San Francisco, which is the last historically Black neighborhood in San Francisco. And they have raised close to $30 million. This is a stunning vision that they have to do this linear park. It's tremendous. And they are addressing a lot of equity issues here. They're addressing everything from, combating gentrification to, multi-generational sort of care, you know what I mean, wellness. And I think parks they're not going to solve every equity problem, but if communities are allowed to tell us what they want and what they need, and we honor that by successfully awarding a grant that might include, childcare services and might include, other issues that address some of the other equity issues, then I think we are potentially using these programs, to contribute in that way. With respect to so just wanted to add that as well. The note about the states, there are probably multiple answers, right? I think in the case of Florida, it is not, I can tell you, it is not because I haven't been trying hard. And, you know, some of it is capacity, right? States are tapped out with their LWCF capacity. Some of it is a lack of sort of emphasis at the leadership level. Maybe this is just isn't an, you know, urban parks isn't an emphasis. My home state of Florida has an outstanding LWCF program and tradition. So they, you know, they are focused in that more traditional area. So I think it's just continuing to help folks understand this isn't competing with those projects. This is different money. This is, you know, pointing out which communities can win, you know what I mean? Pointing out that, you know, that these can, pointing out what we just said, which is that parks can be places where you're addressing multiple challenges. I think it's just an education process and then just a persuasion process.
We're getting tight on time. Lily, did you have a response before I go
No,
to
I just
Lauren?
wanted to say thanks. That was really helpful. Thanks.
Thank you, Lily. We only have probably time for one more question. So Lauren, I'm going to go to you. You have your hand up.
Hi, everyone. Can you hear me?
Yep. Okay.
Thank you for the presentation. It's really helpful. I'm Lauren Taylor. I'm on the City Parks Alliance board. I'm also I'm with the Hyde Family Foundation in Memphis, Tennessee. And some of my colleagues, Karen and Ian, are also on the call. We really appreciate the information today. And it was really, I guess this is more of a comment, but you know, we've played the role in the roles that have been described, granting technical assistance to help with applications, matching or providing matching dollars, early planning, design for park and trail projects that have subsequently received federal funding. But one area I think that we've played a role in Memphis that's been helpful is as a liaison, more so between some of our partner nonprofits and city government or county government in the pursuit of federal projects. So getting those early public-private partnerships set up, and then just helping the different partners connect the dots so that the city will agree that, okay, we can go after this grant for this project. And I think, you know, example of that right now is with the RAISE grant application. There we have a 20-something mile greenway trail that we're trying to complete that goes through 22 neighborhoods. So we've been kind of fostering that conversation between the parties. But you've made me think now, what role can we play to help out with the state, with ORLP? Because we've found that we've been really, especially since I work so closely with City Parks Alliance, I've been encouraging our local partners, like, let's pursue this grant. There's money out there. And the city parks folks have been apprehensive because of challenges with the state's administration of it. And to be honest, I was just looking and I don't see it on the state website. So I need to do some digging and understand what's going on. But you just made me think about how can we help our city partners really with this ORLP grant and pursuing it. And if this, I guess that's a question I'll ask, is Tennessee no longer participating in the program?
You know what, Lauren, I'm not going to know the answer to that. Okay. We can certainly get back with you.
Okay, thank you so much.
Yeah, but any help you can provide in all, you know, and helping all states understand the benefits of participating would be great. By the way, my husband and I just spent 3 days in Memphis. We just got back a week ago. God, we love that. What a wonderful city. We can't wait to go back.
Great.
Maybe I could squeeze in one more quick question for Dr. J and Secretary Estenoz that was in the chat. Just super quick. Really question about, are the agencies themselves doing anything to streamline regulatory requirements, application processes like NEPA or other regulatory requirements to make the programs more accessible?
Yes. Yes. We are trying, at the same time, also ourselves trying to ramp up and grow into a fully funded LWCF world, which is an entirely different world than we've all operated in. that process is streamlining is not an immediate, it's a process. It's hard, particularly when it comes to things like NEPA, you know, regulatory requirements. But yes, we are absolutely looking for opportunities to make our process both less Byzantine and then just less difficult.
Yeah, and again, I'm not from an agency, but I will say we have the privilege of working with our White House Environmental Justice Interagency Council, better known as the IAC. So these are career staff and principals from most of our agencies. And the whole goal of the IAC is to really serve as an internal, I would say, learning community across our agencies and sharing what is working as they, again, are set to advance environmental justice. And I mean, definitely there are things that I'm hearing that agencies are doing, from kind of using community stakeholders to help design a process that works for them versus creating a top-down process that, you know, agencies think will work and really don't. So I think having that community input at the front end has resulted in many of the things that we've seen, from thriving communities networks to other spaces and things that you see agencies are doing, which I think is awesome. And also some really tactical, I would say simple, wonderful things like not having a, you know, in some cases a 20-page application, but allowing communities to record a video as a part of an application. So I think there is definitely some creativity across our agencies that are happening. But of course, in many ways, as I talk about the Justice 40 initiative, a part of this is that huge culture shift that needs to happen, that there are ways that we can transition that can make you know, all these processes more accessible for folks, just as we've had to do with COVID. And so I think I'm seeing signs of progress, and I know we're going to continue to see more.
Thank you for that. So we have to wrap up. I want to make a couple of quick announcements, but before I do, I hope the Funders Learning Network will join me in thanking Secretary Estenoz and Dr. White-Newsome for joining us today. We really appreciate your insights and your guidance, and appreciate your participating in this conversation. Thank you. A couple of quick announcements before we wrap up. In spring 2024, the next virtual Funders Learning Network event will be presented in partnership with the Prevention Institute, and will focus on ways philanthropy is investing in power building and parks equity advocacy efforts. We also hope that you will plan to join us in person for the City Parks Alliance's next Greater and Greener International Urban Parks Conference in June 22nd to 25th next year, taking place in Seattle. For more, there'll be 75 sessions, indoor and outdoors, including keynotes, panel sessions, park tours, and mobile workshops. Diverse range of speakers, including mayors, city park directors, community leaders, and grant makers, presenting on themes of climate resilience, inclusive parks and public spaces, and equitable, sustainable park funding. There'll be a special session at Greater and Greener for the Funders Learning Network as well at that time, so we can continue to share work. So it's a must-attend event. I expect to see all members of the Funders Learning Network in attendance in Seattle next year. Finally, if you're not a member of the City Parks Alliance, please consider joining today as a foundation member for the best access to ongoing programming and events that are available. Your support helps City Parks Alliance continue to provide Funders Learning Network events and other virtual and in-person convenings throughout the year. And also complete the survey. Please take a minute to fill out the survey and let City Parks Alliance know your thoughts on continuing this conversation. There's a link posted in the chat. Hillary just put it up, and your feedback helps drive the conversation for future Learning Network events. So again, thanks for everyone who made today possible and for all of your participation. We hope to see you at the next Funders Learning Network event. Thanks, everyone.